This video is sponsored by Core. At several points along the path to the centre of No Man's Sky's in-game galaxy, the player character comes across the Atlas, the mysterious entity seemingly controlling the massive game world being traversed, and speaks of this thing before them in a way that can only be described as transcendent, the giant orb presenting a vision of the universe that's at once unfathomably vast and yet eerily small, like you're experiencing all it has to offer at once, in a way that distorts our protagonist's experience of space and time. And I've recently found myself thinking of No Man's Sky the game in similarly monolithic terms. It's really been messing with me that by the time you're watching this video, we'll have passed the game's 5-year anniversary. No Man's Sky has now been out for over half a decade, and I can't decide whether it feels oddly recent, like time has flown by since August 2016, or like it's always been there. Its initial launch so infamous as to remain a stark warning to other excited indie teams in danger of overhyping their game. On the same token though, the sheer deluge of abuse Sean Murray and the team at Hello Games was subject to was shamefully cruel and undeserved at the time. But looking at where the general sentiment of players currently sits, how many active players the game still has, evangelical in their praise of how far the game has come, that wave of vitriol that defined the game's release seems all the more distant and absurd. Hell, it's difficult to remember what that first version of No Man's Sky was even like. Back when you were mining nondescript isotopes in this technical mess of functionally identical planets, with your only marker of progression being the aforementioned Atlas interfaces, leaving many players angrily disappointed as they realised their toil in uncovering the secrets of the galactic core led to them being placed in another random part of another random galaxy to repeat the whole process again. And indeed, that image of relative recency I outlined earlier, that my image of No Man's Sky isn't of that 5-year-old game, comes down to the fact that in many ways it isn't a 5-year-old game. That time period has seen a frankly unwavering dedication on the part of the developer, unafraid to make multiple sweeping changes to the ways in which systems and mechanics function, in order to gradually approach something closer to the epic, substantive, open-world adventure people had in their heads pre-launch. And it's a dedication I absolutely respect, but for the longest time now, the end product of all that work was something I thought I was long done with. Call it disappointment with the game, call it exhaustion. In any case, I thought that my last video in 2018 represented my last journey to No Man's Sky's galactic core, in a series of videos checking in on where the game was at. As we'll come on to though, that clearly didn't end up being the case. And what's more, given that I've now done an almost full 180 on my original position, I'm thankful for that. No Man's Sky, after 5 long years of banging my head against the wall, is resonating with me now. And perhaps weirdly, it took those 5 years of Hello Games diligently tightening up every aspect of the game's technical core in order that they could convincingly sell a story of a broken simulation. But before we get into all of that, with all this talk of cores, let me take a quick second to tell you about the sponsor of today's video, Core. One of the main goals of this channel is to get people excited about the nuts and bolts of how games work. And I know from many of the messages I get that the videos have gotten people interested in making their own games. If this is you and you want to know a good place to start, why not try out Core? It's a new free game creation platform that has launched in early access exclusively in the Epic Games Store. Core allows you to utilize the power of the Unreal Engine to build your own games. Without requiring any coding knowledge, you can dive in straight away with thousands of free, high-quality art, music, and sound assets. And if you know how to code or create art, you can use Core to write your own game logic in Lua and craft your own models with built-in, easy-to-use tools. Whatever your level of experience, Core has you covered. Core is an all-in-one platform. You can easily collaborate with other creators by remixing and reimagining their ideas and taking part in game jams, instantly publish your creations to the Core platform for the community to discover and play. You don't need to configure any servers or anything like that. And in addition, Core has announced a 50% revenue share with its game creators. So what are you waiting for? Be sure to download Core to play and create PC games for free by clicking the link in the description. Doing so really helps the channel to boot. Thank you to Core, and now back to No Man's Sky. See, to give you some perspective on my position here, and I do need to hammer home that this is my perspective alone, if you enjoyed all the stuff I'm about to go into, that's totally fine. My struggle with No Man's Sky has been lengthy and kind of difficult to fully express. As much as I genuinely appreciated how the game was connecting with so many people by the point at which I made my last video, after all that time, all that work to try and meet the game on its own terms, bearing in mind that reaching the goal of No Man's Sky just once can take dozens of hours, regardless of which route you take to get there, I just didn't feel up to it anymore. I always thought there was something in No Man's Sky that spoke to me, even if I could never figure out exactly what that something was. And I was desperate to try and find it, while also feeling like every video I made on each journey through No Man's Sky, each update the developers implemented to try and kowtow to legions of rabidly angry players demanding a more traditionally structured game from this whole endeavour, ended up pushing me further and further from that thing I was looking for. At its most basic, I guess my time with No Man's Sky was always a search for meaning and purpose, gradually becoming much less to do with finding the big plot revelation that would explain the secrets of how this game world came to be, and far more examining what kept drawing me back to this game world to begin with. Why do I keep putting myself through the ringer with this thing, this cold, uncaring infinite that makes me endlessly mine for resources, in a process that's often harsh and at times downright unenjoyable? What is it that I see in this thing, in myself? It was an introspection that Hello Games seemed to acknowledge and foreground, that simultaneously got muddied alongside each more conventional update. The open world hijinks, encouraged through an increased focus on multiplayer features and base building for instance, seemed at odds with the compelling loneliness at the game's core. Like the presentation of a more structured journey through the universe didn't line up with the seemingly inherent chaos of that procedurally generated universe. It also didn't help that at that point in time, the features in question didn't seem particularly fleshed out, meaning that the game didn't have a clear vision, nor was it some big fun thing you could leave your mark on with your pals. It was also buggy as hell to boot, leading to those perilous moments of wondering whether or not your progress in any given objective would be wiped upon the next load. From an outside perspective, all of this felt as if Hello Games didn't fully know what kind of game they were actually making, like they were merely deflecting from their own crisis of existence by piling up this mess of features, trying to wrangle this technological behemoth they had willed into being and now struggled to control or define. And I probably wouldn't be talking about this kind of existential crisis on the part of the developers were it not one they would then weave directly into the game in the form of the Artemis narrative path. Speaking extremely broadly, this represents maybe the pinnacle of what many players wanted from No Man's Sky, a structured space adventure story that would fill the contextual void left by version 1.0's barren journey to the core, as well as serving as a whirlwind tour, a grand, albeit extremely long tutorial getting players up to speed on the various features they can mess around with here. What actually unfolded, however, at least as I saw it, was a deep, often harrowing meta-narrative that not only saw Hello Games confront their role as creators, or more accurately curators, trying to keep up with this beast they had wrought upon a world who had reacted so violently towards their creation, but also forced players to look inward to question why they might have reacted so violently in the first place. What it was they were looking for in this game from the developers, seemingly asking those players, without any malice or judgment, to examine why they felt they were owed anything in the first place, by directly confronting them with their own cosmic meaninglessness, contextualizing the game's simple loop of resource gathering as endless grinding toil, far from the grand adventure you might expect that ultimately amounts to the same violent galactic shift of version 1.0. This was far more in line with what I was looking for from the game. It was at least more relevant to the thoughts I was having as I played. It just so happened that this path was as prone to progress destroying bugs and crashes as anything else in the game, rendering many of its actual systems somewhat broken. At the very least, it frequently left me puzzled as to where the line was being drawn between intentional subversion of mechanical function for the sake of storytelling and features just not working properly. That, and it seemed to butt up constantly against those new features it was simultaneously getting you up to speed with. You know, stop goofing around crashing your ships into one another for a minute so you can each get the same existentially wrought story beats from this same character in rigid sequence. In short, this game's identity crisis seemed like it was one that was only set to worsen over time, and that led to me bowing out for a good few years. years. But you know, there was something about the game's 5th anniversary that felt particularly momentous, with a trailer listing all kinds of updates to the game's technical building blocks that just so happened to line up with a dry spell in releases, and in a real just when I thought I was out moment, inspired me to take to those Technicolor stars in one more attempt to see if No Man's Sky was any closer to realising its potential. And I'm incredibly glad to say that from the off, the effect of these many improvements was extremely apparent. No Man's Sky is good now, it turns out. For one, those issues of is this an unintended glitch or just part of the meta-narrative have largely been put to bed, some perhaps less elegantly than others for sure. When faced with solving the problem of your mining beam instantly cooling down when you release right before it overheats for no apparent reason, one option would be to lean into that issue, add a simple visual indicator of some kind to mark it as an active reload mechanic or something. Or you could just forget about that and increase the amount of time you can hold the beam before it overheats, rendering the heat gauge somewhat redundant, but hey, whether you consider this a solution or merely tucking it under the rug, the problem isn't nearly as noticeable anymore. Otherwise, you can tell pretty immediately that the experience on a technical level has been polished up to a level of stability previously unseen. I remember when crashes here were once a real threat to progress, and now are more or less non-existent. I don't know if I had a single one my entire time with the game. The introduction of features like DLSS on PC keep the game from turning into the frequently juddering mess I remember it being just 3 years ago. And hey, I haven't noticed any repeating planets in the loading screen. That was always a weird hang-up I had that seemed like it would be one of the simpler fixes to implement, but I guess it's sorted now, that's good. The improvements seen in those 3 years aren't merely technical in nature either though. A number of artistic choices, such as the massively increased variety of biomes of different planets right off the bat, really give you a reason to stick around and examine each system for what it has to offer, making for a distinct change from when I found myself spending more time in the space stations of each system buying the component parts of warp cells rather than exploring the planets in those systems. And it all has the effect of turning what was once a highly subjective, hyper-colourful aesthetic, which for the record I always kind of enjoyed, into something you could call a legitimately great looking game. One where 2 different players could feasibly have 2 completely different experiences, fully evoking the sense of wonder, the truly paralysing scale of the universe you always felt Hello Games, and specifically Sean Murray, intended in his invocations of Asimov, Heinlein and the like, rather than some Play-Doh approximation that always felt like it was being held together by tape. I have stories of the truly weird and wacky things I saw on this playthrough, where before I never felt like those stories would have been meaningfully distinct enough to warrant much discussion. I found myself using the screenshot tool a lot more because the planets I was coming across were now so much more vibrant and distinct, as if all the sights and creatures and events I was seeing all sat at that perfect intersection of increased technical fidelity, 5 years of Hello Games experience working within this game's highly specific framework, as well as what seemed like a much greater confidence to let the numbers governing the game's procedural generation do their thing a little, go a bit haywire at times. Sure, it led to the kinds of moments you might not think you'd want from a game like this that I'd never really experienced before here, where, for example, I would find myself stuck on a tiny island on a water planet wondering how the hell I was going to find the dihydrogen crystals needed to fuel my launch boosters, or spawning on a lava hell planet with all of my equipment broken, frantically punching rocks to get the ferrite dust to fix it all, while watching my life deplete at an alarming rate, coming across my ship purely by chance. But that wonder, that fear, was exciting in its own way, a break from the monotony of just following an endless checklist of predictable processes. One of many instances where I felt like I was placed into those glorious first couple of hours once again, where you're trying your damnedest to figure things out against what feel like insurmountable odds. It appears as if Hello Games can lean into that numerically driven absurdity a bit more now, because they have a far more robust technical framework, keeping the resulting chaos from buckling under its own weight. More importantly though, it also lends those aforementioned features that once seemed so trivial a sense of weight and permanency that certainly helped dilute that crushing feeling of disappointment that so plagued the game in prior versions. Take base building for example. Not only is there scope for increased variety of stuff you can build now, I also feel a whole lot more confident that it won't simply be erased on a whim as was very much the case before. And I don't just mean between between big updates, I mean in the same playthrough. See, the first time I really engaged with these systems in a meaningful way, it involved the oh-so tedious process of building the facility an objective told me to, flying to a space station, talking to a specialist for that facility, flying back down to the planet to talk to them again, flying back out to get the things they requested, then flying or warping back to turn in the quest, then repeating the entire process over and over again across multiple specialists, just so the game could teach me that the base building did indeed exist before I could move on with the rest of the story. But let me tell you, one of the most painful aspects of that entire endeavour was returning to my base once everything was said and done to find everything gone, outside of the shells of the buildings that I guess were meant to eventually house a bustling industrial complex. Everything I'd worked towards, even if I'd been railroaded into doing so, reduced to naught. It honestly soured me on the base building to the point that I never went back to it. Why invest the time gathering resources to build all of this stuff if the game is going to arbitrarily wipe the slate clean? Why is the game punishing me like this, I thought? The difference now is the fact that once I'd completed my journey, I returned to my planet to find that everything was as it was, totally intact. It's something that seems relatively minuscule, but suddenly the idea of actually spending the time building a base didn't seem totally alien to me. Just knowing that the game wasn't going to completely disrespect my time or effort was enough to make me consider the feature worthwhile. But out of all the features and technical updates, the true game changer of this whole package as I see it, the thing that sums up that feeling of wonder so perfectly, is No Man's Sky's VR mode, added since the last video I made on the game. It's the one thing I allowed myself to check in on once I got my Oculus Quest, and I've briefly discussed its merits in prior videos, but god damn, it might be one of the best examples I can think of in terms of virtual reality altering the very foundation of a game and how you play it. Because the core of No Man's Sky remains pretty much exactly the same with a headset on. You know, you're still wandering around the same star systems and planets mining for resources, but it turns those otherwise rather trivial activities into real tactile experiences. Reaching over your shoulder to grab your multi-tool, pushing buttons on your wrists to navigate menus and refuel your various equipment. This is some of the most rudimentary stuff you can do in the game, and yet now it fully places you in that role of technological space wizard. Most importantly though, VR completely shifts your perception of scale in the game. One of my biggest issues with No Man's Sky initially was how it took the unknown infinite of space and made navigation so trivial, with entering and exiting your vehicle, lifting off and engaging drives all being a mere button press away, that it ended up feeling small, like you were merely picking planets off of a menu, sometimes literally so, and enduring an arbitrary wait as you approached. That all changes when you're grabbing to lift the lid off your canopy. You're suddenly surrounded by your ship's consoles and buttons, all convincingly grimy from use and feeling all the more present for it. An immediacy bolstered by your ability to reach out and grab the levers, pushing a physical object forward in order to take off and control your boost, and maneuvering a joystick to steer. It's one thing admiring the cool ringed planet in the distance looking like an old Asimov cover or something. It's another thing entirely to look out your window and see just how gargantuan those rings actually are in full 1-to-1 scale. It is a complete trip to be that close to a world's extreme conditions, to be able to crane your neck up and see the planets and stars as more than just a colourful skybox, but an atmospheric tarpaulin draped over you, surrounding you. And with the aforementioned increase in biome diversity, you come across a lot more oddities in rock formations and plant life. And sure, it can often be intriguing landing on a planet with all these weird geometric shapes, but actually standing next to them can turn them downright creepy, ominous, and sometimes awe-inspiring. It's the same deal with the creatures you find. Once meme-worthy in their insane mismatched combination of body parts, it suddenly isn't so funny anymore when they're towering over you and stomping about. Everything about No Man's Sky takes on a different, more immersive role in VR. Oh, and speaking of, the game has increased companion functionality now that lets you befriend and maintain that friendship with a few particular beings you might come across on a planet. A relatively simple system that merely requires you to mine some carbon to keep them well fed, but one that led to me developing an actual bond with my big old pal, not just because of the gameplay benefits they would offer, for significantly easing the speed of traversal, for example, but because of the actual comfort the feature inspired, in being able to call upon a friendly face at will while on a hostile planet. Because with the increased scope for that kind of brutal hostility, I ended up feeling more alone at times on my journey than I ever had with No Man's Sky previously. Which finally brings us onto the game's meta-narrative, the Artemis Path, or Atlas Rises, or Next, or whatever it's called. At one point, seeming like the only true semblance of structure or purpose the game really had. And structurally, it's nearly the same as it was before, albeit with a couple of quality of life improvements. The quest greets you as you awaken, cryptic enough in its messaging to lure you into space in search of adventure and glory as you conquer the galaxy. And for a while, it's great. You follow the objectives, learn about the different systems at play here, and get into contact with the titular Artemis, and go about finding a way to meet up so you can continue your adventure to the core together. Hooray for video games! That is, until you collect everything you need and attempt to find the meeting point, only to come to the lurching realization that it's not there. Artemis isn't there. In fact, their warmth and companionship belies the fact they've technically been dead the entire time you've been talking to them. Instead, you're communicating with something akin to a ghost in the machine, obliterated by the omnipotent creator Atlas after Artemis tried to use a portal intended for the hostile Sentinels to travel from their galaxy to another, with their soul now trapped in between. And from that bleak realization, rather than the grand space adventure you envisioned, where you gain an understanding of your purpose here, your very notion of existence begins to unravel, the numerous fetch quest objectives you embark upon feeling increasingly arbitrary, with each teasing itself as hiding the next big plot revelation, instead seeing you come across new beings, also seeking some kind of meaning in their own way, each miserable in their own way. Apollo is seemingly the polar opposite of Artemis, the latter's warmth being replaced with the former's all-consuming quest to gather more units for no particular reason, just that what else is there to life here? And Null is a whole other story entirely, basically sacrificing everything to achieve the eternal life needed to catalogue everything. Every one of the quintillions of planets in No Man's Sky, every being, every rock, everything in every galaxy, just so they can say they did it, that they won against their creator. To them, that's their only purpose, kicking and screaming against utter futility. On top of this, your infrequent interactions with the all-seeing Atlas reveal just how cold this place is before the actual revelation here, that there is no big journey to speak of, no higher purpose. This is nothing but a data gathering exercise carried out by the Atlas, one of a frankly incalculable amount occurring simultaneously. You exist within a simulation, one that's falling apart as the nervous Atlas reveals it's dying and that it needs reset. And like everything else you've gone through up to this point, it's another set of objective markers in an otherwise desolate universe, so you follow it. And so another galaxy starts up, and you set about doing it all again, I suppose, only this time having just experienced complete existential teardown. And the question this is all asking, in my interpretation, is how do you continue existing in the face of cosmic indifference, insignificance? What do you do with that knowledge? Can you then define your own meaning? In this regard, the aforementioned Null is particularly fascinating to me here. Apollo is brusque, their main focus is money, but they're ultimately relatable, even affable in their own way. Null, by comparison, seems downright inhuman. At first, their proclamations about the enormity of their knowledge of all the things they've seen position them as one of the more imposing figures you've come across on your travels. They were once so defiant in their disregard of the lives, the feelings of others. All they cared about was getting exactly what they thought they deserved from this simulation. If this high and mighty creator isn't going to give me the pat on the back, the feelings of accomplishment I desire, then I'm going to take them by any means necessary. You think you're better than me, creator? I'll show you. But as you set out on your final set of galactic warps to activate the Atlas reset, and Null comes crawling, begging you to reconsider, it's downright pitiful. Even sacrificing everything meant nothing. Okay, so the meta-narrative still exists, it still fulfills the same function of getting the player to question their place in the universe. So far, so Noah Caldwell-Gervais. But what is it about the technical improvements that somehow made it click for me this time when it didn't before? Well, for one, I guess it's nice to not have to look up a guide to install an experimental beta patch, because the anomaly kept glitching last time I went through this, making me think the final quest had broken irreparably and I was going to have to manually warp to the center of the galaxy. Needless to say, it is decidedly more stable now. In all seriousness though, I guess it comes down to the fact that, as I say, this narrative path was once the one semblance of structure and meaning that this game had in my eyes. Previously, it seemed easy enough for me to look at Apollo or Null and think, I get what the game is trying to say with these characters, but if cataloguing things or building wealth isn't the point, then what else am I meant to actually do here? It's all either broken or undercooked. The simple truth though is that there's now enough going on in No Man's Sky's game world to render that quest rather pointless. Enough satisfying paths for you to go down mechanically, enough vibrant beauty to be seen and experienced if you just stop a moment to witness it, that Null skipping past it all is shown to be the single-mindedly spiteful act that it is, a lashing out at their creator. You know that thanks to the improvements to technical stability, that your base, your companions, are still going to be there after everything is supposedly reset. You know, even in the face of complete oblivion and cosmic insignificance, the little thing you have built still stands, still functions. Null, like so many others in the game's fiction, when confronted with that crushing lack of purpose, turns to hatred and conflict. The game is telling you at multiple points that not only is this way of playing not particularly exciting or meaningful in the way that you might want it to be, it's also maybe not the healthiest way to play, to go through life either. But the great thing about it is that with the team's dedication to polishing the game to this level, there's really no malice to any of this. The Artemis path isn't some kind of fuck you to players who might have been disappointed in the original game. The developer wants this game to be as good as it can be as well. You get the feeling that Hello Games really does care about everyone who sets foot in this universe. In my eyes, it would seem the developer is not immune from this introspection. In fact, the Atlas's instability is characterized as a desperate plea, a chance to do things over, to remove an anomaly, saving the Atlas from its own oblivion by sprouting an entirely new galaxy that's more in line with what each player individually wants out of the game. And I wonder why a creator might have that kind of panicked reaction to the people inside their creation, rebooting it every so often to try and make it better. Either way, the end result is going through again, should you so choose. At the end of the day, the Sentinels are still there. This is still a data gathering exercise undertaken on each of its travelers going through the galaxy, each subconsciously envisioning themselves as the lone hero, unaware of their complete uniformity. It is bleak. Don't get me wrong though, despite the actual things the Artemis path gets you to do being pretty nothingy, I would very much recommend going through this story. In a way that's similar to Spec Ops: The Line of all games, it's using a fairly mundane set of mechanics and objective structure as a means of telling an incredibly well-written story, where similar to Null, you gradually forgo everything around you in a vain attempt to continue and satisfyingly conclude the narrative. And like Spec Ops, there's maybe the inkling that sets in that nothing good comes from continuing down this path. But crucially, unlike Spec Ops, this concern doesn't manifest in some abstract, what if I turned off the console headcanon deal. Rather, at several points you're presented with the option of postponing the quest, the game instead taking the much more positive approach of, hey, there's stuff you could be doing instead of this. Are you sure you want to go on like this? Now, the extended grind of the Artemis path to unlock more grind reads as the ultimate checklist ticking experience, truly reducing the scope of your exploration to its most compact, minuscule level, where there is so much more to see and do outside of your blinkered view. I've played through the game multiple times now, and maybe the fact that I already knew how this questline plays out has something to do with this, but it's only on this latest adventure that the Artemis path felt like the kind of not seeing the forest for the trees scenario it should have always been to me, relative to the rest of the game's now improved features. See, it's now fun to play No Man's Sky in any way but the one that reveals the truth of the game's world. The promise of what the game could be has now been pretty much totally fulfilled. There are meaningfully distinct methods of play that have all had their cores tightened up significantly. You can be a mischievous space pirate, you can create an actual self-sustaining system that's all your own without even looking to the vast reaches of the galaxy. You can create a home, a sanctuary in amongst this chaotic, procedurally generated noise in a way that won't have you worrying that the game will just take it away from you in an instant. You can put on a VR headset headset and experience the galaxy at truly awe-inspiring scale and tactility, making the most of its now heightened vibrancy and indeed unpredictability. No Man's Sky is a rollicking space adventure now, if you take one of the game's multiple hints to just stop all of this, to take Nada's warnings to heart about being sucked into the Atlas's lure, to look at the holograms before you, barely existing under extreme mental and existential duress as they are, and realise that, hey, maybe I'm okay with where I am. You can mess around with friends, or indeed connect with others whom you might not know. And it may look goofy because you're seeing all these daft avatars clumsily running about, but you can be safe in the knowledge that you're all just figuring out your own place in all of this together. Coming back to my base and finding that my specialists were still there was a great means of selling me on how much more stable the game's systems are now compared to back then, but more than that, it was just a nice feeling of permanency. In the philosophical sense, it was a wonderfully absurdist moment of comfort, beautifully reflected in maybe my favourite line in the game, where the infectiously chirpy Polo turns to you as you learn of the truth of the universe and tells you, "We are all anomalies here. We should not exist, and yet we do." Joy! And all of this has fascinating narrative implications in terms of players being forced to make the choice to bask in the ignorance of a simulated world and rejecting the truth of the matter, denying the false role of the lone hero seeking and acting out their grand purpose, and instead choosing to accept their role as a microscopic blip. After all, upon deciding to let Artemis die rather than place their soul in another hollow simulation, you're told that Artemis is free from pain now. Few can say the same. Before you run back out to the now gloriously opulent Anomaly's main foyer, filled to the brim with avatars just like yours, bumping into one another as they frantically fill out their daily quest logs and upgrade checklists. There's some really wild philosophical quandaries being posed in all of this. It's just that now, Hello Games has finally made wrestling with these existential questions an engaging mechanical struggle, a meaningful choice between a compelling but bleak narrative and a now compelling, reliable set of systems with which you can define your own adventure. And with that in mind, it's interesting to consider the fact that if you want to tell a story like No Man's Sky's, one that draws attention to its nature as a game, the walls of its illusion falling apart before the player's eyes to expose the nuts and bolts breaking underneath it all, as is seemingly the case with basically all game narratives of this nature, the actual mechanisms running at the game's core almost need to be more robust than they would be in a normal title. In a way, it's easier to excuse bugs in a game that isn't going down that metatextual route, a momentary blip requiring an equally momentary suspension of disbelief. But if that blip is the point of what you're saying, if the player is meant to read this breakage as an in-game indication of their place within a broken simulation, then you need to make sure the game falls apart in exactly the way you intend it to, a precision that seems somewhat contradictory to the chaos unfolding in the narrative. In short, it was all well and good all those years back being presented this meta-narrative, being shown that seeing everything isn't a possibility and you wouldn't feel fulfilled even if you could conquer it all, being told to stop and smell the roses because the quote-unquote goal wasn't the meaning of all this. But that vision was always going to ring a little hollow, because the roses in question were themselves so plastic, as lifeless, insignificant, and above all else as riddled with bugs as the main quest line designed to direct you towards them. But after 5 years of devoting themselves almost entirely to this title, Hello Games has given life to those roses. And going through the game again, it might be about the meaningless chaos of the universe we exist in, but at the very least, it now gives players robust enough tools to manage the inevitable stress of that realization, to define their own sense of what this game means in its wake. In other words, through their work on No Man's Sky, Hello Games, for my money, has managed to inject real, affirming hope into an otherwise indifferent void. And look, I'm busy, I still probably won't return to No Man's Sky after this unless there's some major new update. Oh, and of course, as soon as I'm about to release this video I've been working on for a month, Hello Games releases a trailer for the Frontiers update. I probably won't be covering it for a long time if ever, but god damn, it looks like it rules. But that's only because I'm pretty content leaving things at this point with the game. And that's not always been the case. Even when I could say I wasn't particularly enjoying No Man's Sky, the game always remained a weird point of contention even in terms of my own thoughts about my position as a quote-unquote critic. In some way, it's been a part of my life for the vast majority of the time you could call me that, I guess. I've examined it a bunch and never felt like I got what I needed out of it, but also never felt like I was able to truly give myself over to it in the way that's required. I didn't know if I was perhaps being unfair or missing the point somehow. Hell, maybe I still am. Even before now, this game was clearly doing things that no other game had done. Wasn't that worth something? I always thought I was pretty on board with the idea of supporting developers who clearly had a vision despite any imperfections, but I guess I've had my own shortcomings in that regard. At the end of the day, the idea that this game was getting me to ponder that stuff over such a prolonged period of time, to ask those pretty fundamental questions about my profession, my values, and everything else, says a lot about how special a game it's probably always been, even if it didn't always click with me mechanically. No Man's Sky still isn't perfect, it's still a bit visually glitchy at times, and they never quite got the wanted system right, and the crafting is still pretty resource intensive, and powering a base is something I still never properly figured out. Well, come to mention it, the ship combat controls are still not great, but it doesn't need to be perfect. It's polished enough, as good as it needs to be for me to finally fully connect with it in the way that a work of art this lovingly crafted deserves. Thank you very much for watching. Thanks again to Core for sponsoring the video and their patience in me getting it done. Check the link in the description to download it for free. Oh, and also check out my podcast and Twitch, links in the description. I'd also like to thank my patrons here, without whose support I would never be able to make videos like this, especially longer ones than I usually focus on. If you've enjoyed any of the videos I've put out and want to help the channel continue so I can keep making more, you can directly help out as well as get things like early access to completely ad-free uploads by heading to patreon.com/writingongames and pledging only what you feel comfortable with. I am forever thankful for your support in whatever form it takes. Special thanks go to SL128, Mark B. Writing, Artyom Vitsyuk, Shardfire, Spike Jones, Jesse Ryan, Dallas Keane, Timothy Jones, Charlie Kimball, Tom Webster, Tommy Carver Chaplin, Winter, David Björk, Lucas, Bryce Snyder, Dr. Motorcycle, The Nameless Guy, Henry Mielek, Kibi Amori, Leah Chinello, Ruth Knapman, Nicholas Villeneuve, Captain Knusprik, Danis Sikauskis, Jordan Midler, Max Cohen, and Charlie Yang. And with that, this has been another episode of Writing on Games. Thank you all so much for watching, stay safe, and I will see you all next time.